It is the Martha Zoller Show, and that was the voice of one of the families of the hostages that are American hostages that have been in the hands of Hamas for more than 6 months. We don't know if they're alive or dead. Guy Benson is joining me right now. You see Guy on the Fox News channel. He also has a podcast, and you can find him everywhere, and we appreciate him being with us today. Good morning, Guy. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So, this is so gut-wrenching, this story of these American families. And there's a lot of other families, not just American families. But it seems like the White House has had a lot of difficulty even talking about the Americans that are being held hostage. And they continue to talk about a ceasefire. But in my mind, if you're not saying release the hostages first, it's really empty words.
Well, it's worse than that. It's a huge gift to Hamas. If you have decoupled hostage release and Hamas surrender from ceasefire, you are hampering Israel's ability to win, and you're enhancing Hamas's ability to win. And Hamas, in their mind, to win, they need to pull off October 7th, which they did. They need to survive somehow after October 7th, which remains to be seen whether they can. And then part of their goal is to turn the world against Israel. And it's not hard to do because much of the world, for some reason, I think people can draw their own conclusions, just often end up being hostile to the only tiny Jewish state on planet Earth surrounded by enemies who want to kill them. So it's been a very frustrating and disheartening thing to watch just from my perspective. And I'm not someone with a loved one over there. I think you're right to highlight Americans because, of course, it's horrible. Hamas killed 1,200 people that day and stole hundreds more back into Gaza. But I think sometimes Americans might wonder how much of this really is our fight. And I think for multiple reasons, it absolutely is. One reason being Israel's essential nature as an ally in terms of what they do for us intelligence-wise. They do a lot of dirty work in that region that we don't want to do. They're willing to do. They're really crucial allies. They're also, a free country, a democracy. They give rights to minorities and all these things. They share our values that our politicians talk so much about. But just in terms of this current crisis, there were dozens of Americans murdered by Hamas on October 7th. Americans. Among the 1,200, dozens of them were Americans. And there are still, we believe, we hope, we pray, 5 living American hostages being held by Hamas, including a 19-year-old, a 23-year-old from New York, whose parents I just interviewed on Fox and Friends the other day. You can imagine how frightened and distraught they are. And there's also a young man, roughly my age, whose wife just gave birth to their daughter while he's in captivity. And imagine being her. No idea if he's coming home. No idea if he's still alive, if he will ever meet this child. If he's still alive, he has to know that she was due and there's a child now in this world that's his, and he has no idea if he'll ever get to meet that child. This is horrendous. It's horrific. Hamas is 100% responsible for it, and it is astounding and disgusting to me that the president himself in this newly released interview appears to have decoupled hostage release from the ceasefire that Hamas wants. Hamas is rejecting it anyway because it's not a long enough ceasefire. That's where their head is. They feel so emboldened. And it's like without American leadership in this country, I think there's a reason why probably very few of us can name even one of the Americans being held hostage actively by terrorists. I mean, I feel like it's crazy. We should all have like a clock on the evening news, and we should all know the names and all that. But for some reason, led from the top, it's sort of like, oh, well, this is unfortunate, but what we really need is to win Michigan. So, whatever has to be done has to be done. It's so gross.
So I never worried that much about the domestic policy that Joe Biden would bring. I mean, I am a partisan, but I believe we can work our way out of most of any of that. What worried me the most from the beginning was Joe Biden and foreign policy, because President Biden, when he was Senator Biden, was on the wrong side of every single foreign policy issue since pulling out of Vietnam, including the getting out of Afghanistan. He didn't want to kill Osama bin Laden when he was the vice president. He has just been wrong on every foreign policy issue throughout his whole career, yet he is touted and seems to have made a lot of money off of his foreign policy expertise. For me, that's what's terrifying, because we've got a border that's out of control, that who knows how many terrorists are in this country right now, what's going to happen between now and the election and beyond as a result of the poor and weak foreign policy that we are exercising at the hands of Joe Biden.
Yeah, and he's also, let's just be real. He's not a smart man. He never has been. He was a windbag senator who would spout off and say a bunch of things, often lying about his own biography and embellishing things for purposes of self-aggrandizement. You're right, Robert Gates, who was defense secretary under Bush and Obama, wrote a memoir in which he said Joe Biden was uniquely wrong on every major foreign policy issue in his lifetime. And when he's just some gas bag from Delaware pontificating in some Senate committee, or even just sort of the jovial, slightly weird, neck-sniffing vice president of a young, vibrant, healthy president, whether you liked Obama or not, that's one thing. When he has all of this power concentrated in just him, one man, commander-in-chief, president of the United States, all of that wrongness and all of that really subpar intellect and all of that now diminishing capacity matters a lot. And, it is... I've never been a Trump fan. I'm very open about that. It is also, I have to say, pretty unnerving to think about the next, 9 months of this presidency, let alone the possibility of another 4-year term, which I don't think he would make it through just one way or another. I think he would probably step down or what have you in a second term. And then who would be waiting in the wings at that point if they win again. That's equally frightening, if not more so. So, it's a very, very stark choice coming up in November. And you know better than anyone in your audience, Martha, the state that you guys are in is going to be really, really, really important.
And I will tell you that Brian Kemp, in his reelection in 2022, who he was able to cobble together a pretty good majority. He, along with Secretary Raffensperger and our new Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, were able to bring back home all the Republicans, bring in independents and Democrats.
And what, he won by 8? I think Kemp won by 8. It was really impressive.
And it was actually, he did a lot better, just like Ron DeSantis did a lot better without Donald Trump's help than with Donald Trump's help, as far as the majorities that they got. But at the same time, he is committed for 2024 that he is going to prove that Georgia is not a purple state. Okay? He says there are enough numbers of Republicans to vote if we can get them out to vote, along with independents and Democrats. And he is making it his sole job to make sure that that happens. A lot of people say, oh, what's he going to do in 2026? Will he run for Senate? Who knows? He is, every time I've met with him, he is singularly focused on having the best outcome possible in 2024. And it's interesting to see this sort of détente that has happened between him and former President Trump, because, Trump said a lot of things about him, but Kemp has never responded. He's never responded negatively. And so I think Trump needs Georgia, so he's going to leave it alone. And it's very interesting to watch.
He needs Kemp.
Yes.
And the thing is, Kemp, I think Donald Trump, to some extent, he obviously demands absolute loyalty, like slavish loyalty. And if he doesn't get it, then he rips on people. And I think it's a very obnoxious thing about him, one of his qualities. I will say, within that context, I think he actually respects people who stand up to him in a way that is fairly classy, and then he also respects success. And for Brian Kemp to, not only because, Trump was hinting that maybe Stacey Abrams would be a better governor than Brian Kemp of Georgia, which is an absolutely crazy thing to say. Kemp never took any of that bait. And then not only did he beat Trump's handpicked challenger to him in the primary, as you recall. I mean, just absolutely wiped the floor with him. It was a blowout embarrassment for David Perdue. I wish he hadn't run against Kemp, but Trump put him up to it. He tried, and Kemp won a blowout and then carried almost, with one big exception, the entire GOP ticket to victory in a year that wasn't great for Republicans around the country. And I just have to think that Trump probably looks at that and says, well, we tried, but that SOB is tough, and he did it without me. And you know, he also loves to take credit for other people's success. He can't do that with Kemp. Kemp did that on his own with that operation, and now whatever they think of each other and whatever the audience thinks of Trump or of Kemp or any of that, if the decision has been made that Biden and Harris cannot win again, Trump and Kemp really need each other, not just for the immediate future, but I think in the medium-term future as well. So, you know, if Kemp can continue being the adult in the room and deliver outcomes, which it sounds like based on, you know him well, that bodes well for Georgia. And I'll put it this way. If Georgia is blue again in November, it's really hard to imagine Republican victory. So, you know, no pressure, but
I know
that's the reality. You guys are a handful of maybe one of 3 states that's going to matter the most.
So one final question. Are you following at all this story about Biden possibly not being able to get on the Ohio ballot? Is there anything to that?
You know, I've seen a few headlines. I just, you know, maybe there's some giant storm brewing. I think he's going to lose. I think he's going to lose in Ohio anyway, probably pretty handily. You know, he's won 8 or 9 points there. Trump has, rather, the last 2 times. It's pretty solidly red at this point.
Right.
But I have to imagine that the incumbent president and the major party nominee is going to be on the ballot in all 50 states. If it looks like there's a real serious issue there, I'm sure it'll crop up in a more dramatic way. I've seen the headlines. I'm not convinced that there's something really, really astounding happening there.
Yeah, that 90-day deadline of being the nominee is what it is. And I've always questioned this late convention that the Democrats are going to have because, you know, it makes it seem like they think he might not last. And so they want to have time to put someone else in there. But it is interesting how late they're doing that convention.
Well, I mean, I tell you what, if we keep getting more inflation reports like the one that we just got today, worse than expected again, Democrats here in Washington, D.C., I live in the D.C. area, they almost all will speak in hushed, worried tones about how much trouble he's in. And they are just hoping that Trump's flaws and legal problems and the way that they're going to try to message on abortion, they're just hoping that that combination is just enough for them to somehow win this thing again, but they are very, very worried about it. I do think that there's some of them who would very much like to, pull the trigger and send Joe off on the iceberg into permanent retirement. But the problem is he is ensconced as the sitting president. He doesn't want to go anywhere. He wants, and I believe his wife, they want to run and win again. And so it's very hard to get around that. If he's the incumbent and he's now the presumptive nominee, he's got all these delegates. The question is, even if they wanted to maybe try something for the convention and have some intervention and have him step aside or whatever, I think the absolute bloodbath politically within the Democratic Party that came next would be one for the ages, because they are almost universally worried about Biden. A lot of them feel like it's stupid to run him again, but they have no choice. But when you then say, okay, who's next then? If not him, then who? You get a lot of grimaces and even more sweating about it. And some people will say, how about this person? No, that she can't win. How about him? No, there's no way he can win. Plus, you can't have him jump her. And there's a lot of identity politics caught up in it. So I think kind of the inertia and the path of least resistance for them is, let's just run this guy again, hope for the best, put all the eggs in the anti-Trump basket, and see what happens. That's their plan. Not a good one, but it might just work. And the Republicans have all sorts of great arguments to make. They should be the favorites, I think, to win this next election for any number of reasons. But as we saw in 2022, an expected red night doesn't necessarily go that way for any number of reasons. So I think overconfidence is a huge mistake on the right.
Guy Benson, you can see Guy on the Fox News channel all over the place and on podcasts. How's the best way to follow you, Guy?
Guy P. Benson on Twitter or X. I'm on Instagram, same handle, Guy P. Benson. And then you can find me at GuyBensonShow.com. That basically has you covered.
Absolutely. Thanks for being with me today. We'll talk again soon.